Hi, everybody. We'll let you take a couple minutes here to get on. Hope you're having a fabulous day. It's the last day of November. It's crazy. Holiday season is upon us. Hope you all had a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving. A lot of turkey at my house going on. So, and I don't want to wait too long because we have a great presentation and I know she's got a lot of great information for us. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get rolling. Hi, everybody. Christy Weeks here. I am the brand and digital media manager for Harmony Foundation, and I'm so grateful that you all joined us. Today's presentation is Spirituality and Recovery, a Way of Life, presented by Annetta M. Sutton with 5 Point Consulting. So real quick, for those of you who are new, Harmony Foundation is nestled up on a 43-acre campus in the Rocky Mountains, just outside of Estes Park, Colorado. We are a residential rehab program. We offer comprehensive treatment for adults and their family members. So here's a couple of little bullet points about us. You can read all of them. I'm going to touch on a few. We've been around for 53 years. We believe that recovery from drugs and alcohol is absolutely possible. And we have a 70-bed residential program. We have medical detox, and we have a fabulous IOP program. And we also have a very, very strong alumni program that we're very proud of. If you have any questions about any of our programs or services, please feel free to reach out. You can call our admissions staff at 866-686-7867. or visit our website. That's the quickest way to get a hold of us, or reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. So for a few housekeeping items, we do record these webinars. I will have it uploaded to our website by end of day Friday. So they will be accessible at that point, but without the CEU. We do record these, which helps us track who participates. So you have to be involved in the webinar for 45 minutes in order to receive a CEU. And I will have those to you via email by end of day on Monday, December 5th. I'm asking for an extra day here. It's been a crazy week. So if you'll give me to the end of the day on Monday, I'd appreciate it. If you have any problems and you have not received your certificate, please feel free to reach out to me. My email's on the screen. Let's see. Oh, look, my chat box is running. Hi, everybody. Jump on and let us know where you're from. We'd love to hear from you. And secondly, I also want to let you know that Annetta will be answering questions as we go. So if you have a question, enter it in the chat box. I'll be paying attention and we'll get those questions answered along the way. So for our fabulous presenter today, it's Annetta Sutton. She is out of 5 Point Consulting in Minneapolis. Yes, Annetta?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. I knew there was an M. I wasn't sure if it was just Michigan or if it was Minneapolis. We had just talked about Michigan, so I didn't want to mess that one up. So she has over 40 years of recovery experience, 12-step spirituality and transitions. Her professional life includes spiritual care professional Hazelden Betty Ford, director of the Office of Social Concerns. She's worked in prisons, hospitals, police chaplain, educator, program developer, and a speaker. She is the author of Catholic Alcoholic, A Witness to Addiction and Redemption, Our Little House on the Prairie, Minister with a Badge, and authored a monthly column titled Living Justly. We will have more information regarding her book available for you if you're interested in that. So I know she's got a lot to go. All her educational credentials are listed. She is very, very well qualified, and I'm so grateful she is here to present to us. So I'm going to swap it over to her. Let's see, stop share. All right. Hop on there, Annetta. It's all you.
Thank you. Now, let's see. Am I
on? Just need to share your screen.
Share my screen. Okay, here we go. Hi, everybody. So glad to be here on so many levels. First of all, it's a gift from, I call it God, but whoever your higher power is, that Jim invited me to do this for so many reasons. He's a friend, but he's also a former colleague, and working with Jim, excuse me, was an absolute treat. I just told Christy that I have renamed her. She is now Saint Christy. She, the whole technology thing, I'm a neophyte and I'm learning every day, but she was amazing in helping me do all this. So with all of that, I also want to mention harmony. I think it's extremely important for all of us in the profession and all of us in recovery that we qualify our gratitude to every single visionary that created these sacred spaces and places for us to connect, to be a part of the greater community, but also to know that we're not alone and that recovery is possible and hope is all over the place and life literally comes back in recovery. So with that, as Christy said, it's almost 48 years now that I walked through the door of my first Al-Anon meeting. I did not know then that I was going to spend the rest of my life in not only involved, but spending it with people, the beloved alcoholic, like Deborah said in the last webinar. I have such respect for Deborah and Jay in their work as well. We are blessed all over the place with good, professional, intelligent, but most importantly, compassionate people. So when we look at when I look at the 48 years that I've been blessed with walking through the life, living the 12 steps, I always want to go back again and thank all of those pioneers that gave us this way of life. We have a choice. We can pick it up or we can put it down. One of the things I think that has been so basic to this and to spirituality in recovery and spirituality period is that it's simple. It's really, really simple. All we have to do is be willing. Well, what does that mean? It means a lot when you're in the throes of this disease. When I look at the objectives for today, I first want to talk about what brought us to recovery in the first place. I have a real strong feeling about gratitude. And when I walked through those doors that first time, I couldn't breathe. I literally couldn't breathe. And from that day, there have been so many in my life that have said the same thing. So we have to touch on what really is spirituality and how did it bring us to this day. You just didn't happen by this webinar. There's something that occurred in your life that brought you to this day. And so I want to touch on a couple of things, both what is spirituality and what does recovery mean? What does the disease? There are so many words that are used when it comes to alcoholism, when it comes to addiction. Again, research is evolving. I had to smile the other day when I read about the LSD, the work with LSD in terms of addressing addiction. Remember, Bill W. tried that and he was mutilated because they thought that he was going away from the program. Quite the opposite. Bill Wilson worked his entire life once he was in recovery to help every alcoholic. And then, of course, Lois, his wife, who, remember, got as sick. I believe those of us who love the beloved alcoholic, and for me, it's the beloved alcoholics, I got sicker. Why does that happen? We don't have a drug to numb us. All we have are our thoughts and our feelings. And so we go looking. We try to control. We have enormous amount of fear. And so when we look at this as a family disease, I also want to expand it a little further. I believe it's a community, it's a societal disease. We know that in 1956, that the American Medical Association deemed it as an disease and illness, and it was verified again in 1960. Today, oftentimes it's called a disorder. All of those things can be true and are true, but the most basic thing that has never changed, and that is what it does to the spirit. Every single one of us are spiritual beings. Any woman that has carried a child knows that spirit's there before we even enter this world. I've carried 5 children, and let me tell you, everyone had a different spirit, and I knew it before they were born. So we're spiritual beings. What does this illness do? It blocks it. It blocks that spirit. Spirit is energy. One of the things, and I shared this with Christy, that it's difficult for me to speak through a camera because I get my energy from contact with human beings. I absolutely love people. Always have, always will. So technology, thank God for technology, but technology separates us. And one of the main issues when COVID hit, one of the main anxieties I had and I felt was for all of those in recovery that weren't going to be able to get to those meetings, to have that physical contact. And so again, thank God that meetings went live and many lives are saved. Unfortunately, I went to 3 funerals of beloved alcoholics that weren't able to connect to meetings, and they died from relapse. We know that during COVID, relapse was very high. So as we look at the objective for today and we identify blocks, who would have thought 3 years ago that we'd be talking about a virus called COVID? However, I have to throw this in too, because, and we should have been upset with COVID, the pandemic, et cetera, all of us lost a very beloved family member to it. However, we've had a pandemic for a long time, and it's called addiction, it's called alcoholism. And if only the same attention were brought to this as to that, how different our world would be. If the 12 steps were a way of life for our whole entire planet, what a different world this would be. And those of us who have been blessed, we're not better, remember that, but we've been blessed with a gift, and it's our responsibility to share that gift. So when we look at spirituality, it is not religion. I want to make that abundantly clear. Spirituality is not religion. It's different. What is religion? The intent of religion is to, with its rituals, its dogmas and doctrines, it's supposed to buoy our spirits. And in most cases, it does. In many cases, too many, one is too many as far as I'm concerned, it has destroyed the spirit. And so part of my life's work has also been to address that. When we look at the blocks to spirituality, it's very, very obvious what some of those are. And we're going to talk about those today, or I'm going to share with you today. But when we start to connect spirituality, the principles in recovery, we see a pattern. Yesterday, I was with one of my grandsons. I have 11 grandchildren that just I adore. And this one had gotten in basically a scratch at school. And so we have these wonderful conversations when these kinds of things happen. Their parents have a little bit different take than their grandma does. But we talked about how, you know what, Sam, we all mess up. We all do. The important thing is that you learn from it and that you go forward. So within a few minutes, I gave Sam the 12 steps of AA. He's only 12 years old, so, you know. Anyway, and then discovering the steps to healing, and what does that mean? One of my favorite parts of sharing anything when it comes to AA or Al-Anon is my Aunt Vi. My uncles, who I adored all my uncles, and they were all alcoholics. I adored them, and some gained recovery in later years, but my Aunt Vi went through a lot. I was attending a Catholic all-girls high school in the Black Hills, and I would often go over to their home in Lead and spend the weekend. And Aunt Vi said, Annetta, would you help me serve a banquet this weekend? I said, yes, what kind of banquet? She said, it's an athletic association banquet. Well, coming from an all-girls school, my vision immediately were these hunks of athletes that were going to be attending this banquet. So I get all gussied up and get ready, and Aunt Vi and I go down to the church basement. Well, before we got in the door, I could smell smoke. And this was in the days where you could smoke any place. And I thought, oh my gosh, these athletes are smoking? That surprised me. And then I heard laughter. And I thought, oh, these are some happy athletes. And then we opened the inside door, and the room was full of mostly men. There were a couple of women, but mostly men. And these pictures were up front, and there was a book, and it had Alcoholics Anonymous on it. And I turned to my aunt and I said, I don't think this is an athletic association banquet. And she said, oh, I know it isn't. And someone to the side of her said, this is Alcoholics Anonymous conference. And I remember saying to my aunt, I want what they have. I want what they have. Joy, laughter, and now I know spirituality. But oftentimes you hear people say, I'm a grateful alcoholic. I always say I'm a grateful recovering family member. And people that aren't in recovery think they're nuts, that they've lost a marble. Grateful for this nightmare? Yes, grateful. Because had it not been for this, I would have never gotten to know myself. We know that the eyes are the windows to the soul. And so when we look at blocks, oftentimes the common spiritual issues, or I like to call them blocks, are seen in the eyes. You know, a child who, we know the innocence of a child, but they're also very, very honest. But you know when they're being dishonest too. And so despair, unwillingness, arrogance, argument, and we're seeing this constantly in our society. In fact, it's been exacerbated in the last few years. And so when we look at these blocks, we ask ourselves, in recovery, how can this change? Well, it can't unless detox takes place first. What does detox mean? Detox means eradicating that which is causing the blocks in terms of our physical being, and then working on the emotional, the social, and the spiritual. One of the billions of things I love about treatment centers like Harmony at Hazelton, one of the requirements, the spiritual principle, the spiritual journey at Hazelton began with making your bed. And that became a resentment for a significant amount of people. When I would meet with them for a spiritual consult, they were resentful because, what do you mean we have to make our bed? What do you think would be the reason you have to make your bed? Well, then they would go on about how, you know, I have paid people to make my bed. Well, now you're getting paid, and you're getting paid sobriety and recovery. And then I challenge them to look at, has your life been full of getting up and making your bed? And of course, they know it hasn't, because the mismanagement that this disease, this illness causes. there is no made beds. In fact, a lot of times there's no bed at all. So when we look at the spiritual principles, which replace those spiritual issues, it's really a value system. The principles of the 12 step are really a value system. And all of us have a value system, every one of us. It came from our parents, if they were involved, which mine were, very strong, principled parents that I experienced and was fortunate enough to be raised by. I also, when we look at a value system, it comes from our coaches, our community. I had a coach that was a baseball coach, and he was just drafted into being a basketball coach. And he said, I can't do that. And the sister said, well, you coach baseball, you can coach basketball. And that man was so humble in how he approached us girls that we would have walked to the end of the world for him. Why? Because he treated us with such dignity, such respect, and we were never wrong in his eyes. For 35 years, the janitor of our school coached us girls. And when he retired, if I would have had to crawl, I was going to be there for his retirement party. He taught us a value system that was absolutely impeccable. So it comes from a lot of different areas, a lot of different facets. And in many times, it only takes one person to give us a value system. But when we're in the throes of this illness, this disease, we go away from our value system. Why? Because our attitude and our behavior changes. As a family member, when I look back on some of my behavior, and even now, I have to guard against several of those blocks. I have to look at it a lot of times every day, sometimes every minute. So it's a process. We're never perfect. We don't arrive. And that's the important thing. The important thing to remember, we never arrive. It's a process. And so looking at honesty, hope, faith, courage, integrity, humility, compassion, justice, perseverance, spiritual awareness, and service, we want to live like that. And that's it. The attitude, the behavior in recovery comes back in line with our value system. I love to tell the story about a member of one of my first Al-Anon groups. And she was a crabby patty. And everybody they were kind to her, but they kind of gave her space, I'll put it that way. And her husband, who was a saint, literally had been in the program for years, and he was so loving to her and so good. And there was a couple of us, anyway, I thought, now this man's a saint. He's got to live with this negativity and crabbiness day in. It's proof that the program works. One day she came to a meeting and she said, I don't know whether you guys realized it or not, but I've been kind of crabby. And then she proceeded to say, I'm changing. I started a gratitude log. I'm going to start looking at things I'm grateful for instead of things I'm angry about, resentful about. Now, that was nothing short of miraculous on so many levels. But there is a story that tells you what can happen in recovery. There are two areas, there are many blocks to recovery, but there are two areas that I specifically want to identify and share. Professionally, this has been these two are the two that have surfaced the most in my own work. And that is trauma, abuse that has happened. And when it happens to a child, the experience sends this child without help into a life of depression. They lose the spark. They lose their energy. It leaves them. You know, when you watch a child, like I mentioned before, the honesty and the energy of a child, when that is taken away, because of trauma or abuse. To bring it back is a major accomplishment. It happens. I've seen it happen many times. But abuse and the cycle of abuse as a victim of, and I really dislike the word victim, but the reality is that you are a victim when you are in an abusive relationship. But when the tension begins to build, I don't like fighting. I never have, I never will. And so what I would do is I would cry. Well, that caused even more tension. And then came the acute battering. And when the battering occurred, there was nothing I could do except weep. And then when I started to move on it, happened after the remorse would come in. And then when that remorse enters in, it's like Christmas. I'm sorry, I will never do this again. I promise you, flowers, candy, all of those good things, and reconciliation takes place. And then the tension goes back because the issues have never been dealt with. You throw alcohol or other drugs into this mix, and we see the results every day when we pick up the paper. We see the results. So when children have been subjected to this, and that's been the imprinting or the modeling, what's going to happen there with their worldview of relationship? If it's happened to them directly, what's going to happen to their worldview? In the work I've done in prisons, I would say 100% of those that I came in contact with had a significant issue related to trauma, loss of childhood, which is the second area that I want to talk about, and that is grief. Too often we kind of sidestep this issue, and grief of all of the blocks will control more of our life. If we don't have the tools to work with it, it will work with us. And I love to go back to Bill Wilson with this. For one thing, I've done an enormous amount of work and research in terms of Bill Wilson. And for some reason, I was always drawn to Bill and Bill's story. Loved Lois, loved the work she did, loved what she gave us in Al-Anon, but Bill was my guy. And so I had to look at myself, okay, what's the reason for that? And then I did a whole project. I went to his childhood home. I did a whole research project on Bill Wilson. Well, I discovered it was grief that drew me to him. He had a magnificent childhood up until the day that his mother announced that his father was leaving due to his drinking. They were divorcing, and she was going away to school. Bill Wilson never had the opportunity to work through that grief. Fortunately, he had his grandparents that he lived with, and he had a local character that was very, very fascinating gentleman that basically provided some solace and stability. But that changed Bill Wilson. Today, if I were to have a conversation with Bill, we'd talk about grief and the loss of his childhood. But then complementing, and that's in a painful way, that loss of childhood, he fell in love for the first time. He went to a school that his grandparents said he was going to. Nobody asked him, he was told. And he was going to make sure that he was okay and that he was accepted because he had significant self-image issues, which many people do. And when he fell in love with Bertha Banfield, they were going to walk into the sunset together. They had already started to plan a life together. And he got into school, and it was announced that Bertha had died the night before. Those two losses, the divorce of his parents, abandonment of his parents, and the death of Bertha Banfield, very significantly impacted Bill Wilson. When I work with anyone, one of the first things I ask them is, tell me about the losses in your life. And they oftentimes look shocked. Well, what does that have to do with anything? And then they, humor me, and they begin to talk. Well, one of my colleagues gave me this ball of emotions. And this is what grief is. It's confusion, it's anxiety, it's abandonment, it's all of those things. So when we have a loss of safety, security, stability, that impacts the physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and every person's grief is very individual and very personal. It's important to realize it's never complete. What we do is we rearrange it. I just wanted to list some of the examples of grief that we as human beings come in contact with. We know the obvious, which is the death of someone, that physical, emotional loss of a loved one. But a major issue in recovery is the grief of loss of alcohol or other drugs. And I don't know if we always talk enough about that. The life has been surrounded by and controlled by alcohol and other drugs. And there's a grief process that enters in during the letting go of that. Of all losses, there is nothing that compares to the death of a child. That is the most significant death or loss that any human being. Divorce, of course, and for a number of years, I worked in the area of widowhood and divorce. And the one thing that was obvious to the widow is that, or the widower, was that they wished they could have divorced the person so they could still see him. Thing that was obvious to the divorced person is that they still had to deal with them. So but they were both coming from a place of grief. Social standing with this disease, this illness, social standing is also an issue of grief. For a number of years, I would go in to do youth retreats into parishes and communities, and I'd be asked, and then I would be asked to come in after a tragic accident or a significant loss, suicide in a community, especially in schools. And I finally addressed it, and I said, why are we not talking about this prior to the tragedy? And administrators would look at me like I had two heads. And I said, one of the losses is the loss of when young people graduate, that loss of security, even though they can't wait to leave. And of course, that's part of it. They can't wait, they're going to do this, this, and this. But the truth of the matter is a lot of times they sabotage their life because they're that fear of leaving what they have known. Nobody has talked to them about loss, about transition, about grief. And so what happens? A lot of drinking enters in, and unfortunately, a lot of tragedy. Oops. Whoops, I need to go back, see if I get happy with the clicker here. Okay. Relapse is one of the greatest, I shouldn't say one of the greatest, is a great grief for many people. A person very close to me was a chronic relapser, and we just buried him a couple months ago. And that man had so much grief over the guilt of relapsing. And he had this whole cadre of people, sponsors and pastors and AA members, that people just worked so hard to help him. And that caused even more guilt, because he kept saying he let them down. And I would often say the only person you're letting down by sitting in that is yourself. Loss of integrity. And again, I do a significant amount of work and have done at homeless shelters. And so many of the people that I met, my primary work has been in men's homeless shelters. but the tremendous amount of loss and grief that have taken them to the street is significant. And then mental abilities, the loss of mental abilities. And we know that the brain, the liver and the brain are deeply affected by this. And so, and that's grief, that's loss of education. One of my favorite stories is a colleague friend that had been a superb wrestler in high school and college. The disease took him and he went to very dark places. He got into recovery and sobriety, and his entire life turned around. Well, his biggest regret and loss and grief was the loss of his education, because he got scholarships. He was set, and this disease took him away from all that possibility, he thought. I said, baloney. Go and talk to the coach, the head coach, which he did. He not only got back into college, he athletically did what he did when he was in high school, which was nothing, again, short of a miracle. Military, my mom's brothers, 5 of them, all were in the military. And fortunately, they all came home physically, but she always said they never came home emotionally. And remember, I mentioned that my brothers or my uncles who I adored were all alcoholic. And again, now when there's so many things that this is a whole webinar right here, but there's so many things that have occurred within the military. But also what happens is the loss of the military when they leave, because there's a camaraderie and a community of brothers and sisters that is significant. And that grief is also, and again, we don't talk about that enough. Loss of community, loss of belief system. Adoption is a main. I've always said if I ever had the time, I'd do a research project on the number of adoptees who are in prison because nobody's given them the tools to work through the loss of the first people, the first person that they came from. And that's a significant. I've paid for many, many searches for adoptees that have provided not only answers, but some resulted, I always prepare them, could turn either way, but they have the answer. They know then where they came from. And job and retirement. Again, these are just some examples. There are many, many more. So how do we recover? It's called the 12-step way of life. And many people have a problem with the first step. We admitted we were powerless. And I had a problem with that. Well, I don't drink. So at that time, I never even had a glass of wine. So how could I be powerless over alcohol? Well, it took me a while and a wonderful sponsor who said, no, you're powerless over the alcoholic. Have you ever been able to control anything that he does or anything that someone that is in the throes of this? And that changed my life. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves, and that power, for me, it's God. That's been an easy one for me because I was born and raised with a powerful and strong faith-filled mother who passed it on. I also have questioned, just like Bill Wilson, I love his story because he just questioned, and this searching that he did. I never had to do a lot of searching because that power, but I've questioned. Came to believe that power, and again, it might be Buddha. I was raised on Standing Rock, and my Native friends taught me so much about the Great Spirit, still are teaching me. And so whatever that power, it might be the group, it might be that little girl that you call a daughter. It might be that little boy you call a son. That's a power greater than yourself that can restore us to sanity. And then we make that decision to turn our will. And that's a tough one. Yeah, we keep taking it back, don't we? And making that searching and fearless moral inventory. These two steps I've spent half my life working with, and are so important. I can't say enough about a fifth step. It's I had to go to the mat many times in staff meetings, because it was like, they're not ready. And I knew that if some of the folks that were going to leave without a fifth step left, because I had spiritual consults, that they were not going to stay sober unless they dealt with what they had experienced. And so I am so adamant about and encouraging about people making fourth and fifth steps. And then, of course, that humility, which is both 6 and 7, we're entirely ready in the willingness to have God or your higher power remove all these defects of character, and then humbly ask to remove them. That making a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends is extremely important. At the same point in time, we also have to remember, if to harm them, which goes into step 9, when to do so would harm them or others. That's extremely important as well. Again, it goes into not only asking forgiveness, but also forgiving ourselves. And then the last 3 are maintenance steps. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact, and then having a spiritual awakening, we try to do all of these in everything we do all our life. I want to spend just a few minutes on step 11, because it is foundationally, it's one of the most important. And one of my favorite magazines, religious magazines that I love, it's written by the Jesuits, who are phenomenal. And if you ever want to do some research on the connection between the exercise of Saint Ignatia and the 12 steps, it's profound, and that's a whole webinar in itself. But the prayer and meditation in that particular magazine at the beginning of COVID, the title was "We're All Monks Now." And so I looked at that and thinking, thank God that I have the time to not only do my daily reflection and prayer, but I can expand it even further, which I did during COVID. And my prayer was for those that weren't so, didn't have those same kind of tools. And when I was able, and often, I handed away that information and tools to give to people during COVID. But the first act we ever have is breathing. And that first act is changed over time. Why? Because of anxiety, fear, trauma, addiction. So when we begin in recovery to draw attention to that breath and begin to breathe and begin to think of it in terms of ageless and timeless, the monastic life has been filled. And one of my favorite monks and writers and mentors was Thomas Merton. And one of the things that he went away in terms of into a hermitage, and I've done that before, and you have to hear your thoughts. You have to, even in my daily practice, I do well, but when you're at a hermitage, it's a whole different ballgame. And so when you're listening to yourself and you quiet the mind, that's what meditation is. Live in the present moment. Thich Nhat Hanh is another one. We just let him go into eternity, but that Buddhist monk taught me how to do the dishes. I used to fight with my sisters all the time about dishes. And we in our family, in our household, fighting wasn't an option. We did subtle and passive aggressive is what we call it today. But taught me that when you're doing the dishes, do the dishes, feel the dish, feel the suds, feel the water. And then when we began to notice within, we began to listen to that voice. And what is that voice telling us? So what does that do for us in recovery? It increases ability to focus and concentrate. When we bring that breath in and concentrate on our breathing and letting go, and it reduces tension, anxiety, stress. I mean, how simple is that? I often tell clients, patients that the stop sign is a good time to stop, breathe, and then go on. Reduces emotional turmoil. When all hell is breaking loose in my life, either with just life or situations or relationships, I breathe. I just go to that place of breath. The support in coping with addiction cannot really be minimized. It's beyond the gift. Increase self-understanding, but here's the one that I want you to really concentrate on, and that's emotional maturity. We know that when usage begins in adolescence or pre-adolescence, that maturity stops, and especially emotional maturity. I often have asked my students, have you ever been at a party where there's been a 40-year-old and you wondered why they were there, and they all shake their heads in unison. That's because at 40 years old, he's your age on an emotional level. And that's what happens when usage happens early. The other thing that I strongly encourage, you all have places and spaces that you've been in your life that bring serenity and peace. Here are two of mine. The ocean is very important to me. This particular one was taken when I was in Ireland. And then out my door, I have this lovely grassy knoll, and Mama and her little ducklings come and visit. And I just love that. So all of that, I see my higher power. Spiritual fitness is a way of life, and that life will be richer if we have daily prayer and meditation, a daily inventory, and a daily connection, and making amends. I don't know about you, but again, I have every moment of every day. It's important for me to look at if I've hurt someone, by what I've said, sometimes my thoughts are that what I have to make amends with. And I have to do this inventory in order to grow. And sometimes I don't make the amends right away. Sometimes it takes me a while, but I do them. Daily gratitude, and most important is being in right relationship. And then again, going back to those maintenance steps. This picture I also took in Ireland. It fascinated me because this major rock wall, this beautiful vine popped out. And I thought, isn't that recovery? That's a metaphor for recovery in so many ways. So our priorities, maintaining priorities, first and foremost, we cannot give something away we don't have. If we don't get healthy ourselves and literally know ourselves, we can't give that away. So we have to first take care of ourselves and balance spiritual, emotional, psychological, physical, and of course, social. Second priority, spouse, partner, children, work, extracurricular. If you don't have children or you don't have a spouse, then of course things change and the numbers change. However, this is the one that many people have up here as number one. I call that the softball phase. The extracurricular becomes more important than any of these. And in recovery, those are all brought back when that balance is brought. We had, my sister was a now retired probation officer, we often talk shop, and we talk about all the resources there are. And we are so blessed on so many levels with all the resources. And I love Deborah and Jay's list of resources. There's an excellent one. I would encourage you to go back and check that out from last month's webinar, but there's resources all over. So I often have people say, well, Annetta, what do you use? And my go-to, and I'm going to talk about these in a minute, but my go-to is Annetta, Celtic Wisdom. This book is so wore out. John Donahue, who again is no longer with us, just his writing is fabulous. And Thomas Merton, of course, Brene Brown. My dear friend, who again has left us, not his spirit, but his body, he wrote one of the just the sweetest and most profound and poignant and powerful little books that Hazelton published, I should say. And if you want just a short, simple, but absolutely profound book, this is it. And of course, anything by Melanie Beatty. James Finley also, I've always been enamored with his writings, but the book on meditation, and he talks about the monastery without walls. And of course, as you can tell, I'm in love with the big book, and I could go on and on and on about that, but I won't. And then the 12 by 12, which I believe it is a must in terms of anyone in recovery. That was written, I believe it was 10 years after the big book, what they learned. And that's what I love about this program, is it just keeps evolving. I had someone say the other day, no, you guys are stuck. You're stuck. And I said, no, we're not stuck. If you know the program, you know it's always evolving, and recovery is always evolving. It's not static. There's nothing static about it. One of the gifts in 12 by 12 is the prayer, Bill's favorite prayer, which is the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, given to him by Father Ed Dowling. A new book on Father Ed Dowling that I ordered. I haven't received it yet. I can't wait, because he's another one of my favorite characters and visionaries in this program. And of course, one day at a time is my daily. And then I also read Hope for Today. I mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh, Chinny Lin, who taught me Qigong. And Qigong is a beautiful, beautiful practice of stretching, etc. And then for me, of course, sacred spaces are churches, and nature to me is a church. So that gives you an idea. Christy mentioned my book. It took me 6 years to write, and the title of it may cause pause. However, a client is the one who named it. He said, Annette, I can't be an alcoholic. He asked me if I thought he was. And I said, I can't answer that. I can only ask the question, has it ever caused any problems socially, emotionally, physically, familial, financial? And I said, you don't have to answer me. You just answer yourself. And if there's a yes to any one of those, if you're not alcoholic, the possibilities you're on the way. And he said, I can't be, I'm Catholic. And I was doodling, and I wrote Catholic and under it alcoholic. Well, you'll notice it's the same letters, except for the T. And the T in my tradition is the cross, of course. And so as I researched my family, ancestry, I went to Ellis Island, you name it. I've gone into both sides of the family, and we were so impacted by this illness. And yet our people kept rising up, but they lost farms, they lost marriages, they lost lives. And so I reflect on all of that in the book, but I especially reflect on how the addiction impacted us, but how redemption in recovery. And when I say redemption, I'm not saying it in terms of shame and guilt. First of all, shame is a waste of time. Guilt is wonderful. And my Catholicism has taught me that Catholic guilt it gets a bad rap, but it's excellent because it means that there's a conscience. And whenever I work with someone that is mired in shame, I say, throw it out. It's a waste of time. However, where's your guilt? And then we get to the core, because guilt can help us change. Guilt can help us change. So there's my information. And I mentioned Prayer of St. Francis. This really encapsulates the program. Make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. And with that, as we enter the holiday season, I'm praying that you have a beautiful, safe, serene, and a long ago acquaintance painted this. And I keep thinking and meditating on that little guy that's looking back. And then there's 1, 2 that are looking forward. That's recovery.
Annetta, thank you so much. Everybody, if you have any questions for Annetta, go ahead and enter them now. We have just a couple of minutes. I'm going to kind of roll over some information. I put it in the chat box, but just to reiterate, emails will go out with certificates by end of day on Monday. Please check your junk email folder, because that's where my emails go. It's lovely. That is my location. So check there. If they're not there by end of day, then you can reach out to me and I'll be happy to help you. All this information that Annetta has provided, including the information on her book and resources, I will try and include in the email as well. I'll try and see if Annetta will send me that resource list, because it was a very powerful one. And I so appreciate that, as well as the prayer that stopped me in my tracks. So I so appreciate hearing something like that today. And Annetta, I just wanted, not a great time to chat, but you mentioned something about adoption, which struck with me because I am adopted. And I understand that journey of needing to know. I am not one that has been in prison or anything like that, but that is still a very heavy topic that rides on the shoulders of adoptees as they seek that information as to who they are and where they came from. So I can appreciate the value of that information.
My father died when I was 3, and it changed everything. And I received a second dad, but knowing that my biological father was gone, that's where the understanding and the depth of loss of a biological parent is so important.
Yeah, it's nuts. And I was in foster care for 6 months. So there is that gap of connection. Which I have a theory. And if anybody wants to hear my theory real quick, it is why I keep everybody in my family very, very, very tight and very close to me. Amen. So pray for my children as I smother them. They are adults. I keep them close. But all amazing information. Annetta, I cannot thank you enough. This was an amazing presentation. You have a slew of people in the comments thanking you, and everybody, the evaluation, the survey will be coming at the end of this webinar. If you do not receive it, do not panic. Your certificate is not reliant upon completion of that. We just appreciate your feedback. It will also, the link will be included in your email as well. So please take that time. We appreciate it. Annetta appreciates it. And we would love to be able to fill next year's webinar series with topics that you are interested and vested in. So with that, I'm going to say thank you again Annetta, wishing
Thank you.
everybody a wonderful, wonderful holiday season. No webinar in December, but we will be kicking off January with a special 2-hour presentation from Joanne Baum. So stay tuned for those details. We want to make sure we get that on your schedule because it is a little longer, but I think it is well worth it. Annetta, until next time, I hope you'll come
Yes.
back and see us.
Oh, yes, yes.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Take care,
much.
everybody. Thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye.